Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. I have with me Professor Dipankar Sengupta, one of my favorites, if I may, when I want to listen to some very logical economics. Let me just say that at the outset, sir, and the feeling is mutual with the Dev Talks followers as well. And I don't know if you had the chance to look at our previous video, wherein some interesting Chinese comments also came across. So there was this 20-cent army that actually came after you as well. So that was a
Okay.
very interesting feedback that came across. So probably, what we discussed was bang on the reality. So on
Uh,
that note, sir,
uh, I would like to see those comments. Criticism is always welcome.
absolutely. So I'll send them to you. So today, sir,
Sure.
what we are wanting to discuss is basically how the world economics is going to go forward. There's terrible news coming across globally as far as economics is concerned, apart from India, Saudi Arabia, Russia, and probably one or other country where economics seems to be a little stable. What's going to happen to the economic outlook of the world? And of course, since we are Bharatiyas, we want to find out what's happening within our country. Where will we head? Because India, Bharat is not in the moon. Unlike the Chandrayaan, we are part of this global community, and anything that happens in the globe will affect us. So, sir, thank you so much once again, and welcome to the show. Your opening comments, sir, what's happening in this world as far as economics is concerned?
Uh, Adi, first, thank you for having me on this show. I love this show because, being the only person on the show, I can basically have all the time that I want, which is not always possible on the other shows.
Sir.
Okay. When it comes to the global economy, I think it's a mix. Let us start with the United States economy, which has been downgraded. Okay. If you see, apart from the downgrade, if you look at the American economy, if you look at employment rates, if you look at how the economy has been faring, there is good news on that particular front. Inflation is cooling off. That's also good news. The problem is the following. The problem is one of public finance. That is the American government running things on a sustainable basis. Look,
Hmm.
government after government after government, starting with Trump, Obama tried to be more responsible, starting with Trump, has been running these particular deficits for a long period of time. And somewhere down the line, these deficits, this public debt, in a sense, has to be controlled. And in my opinion, the downgrade that has come is basically to do with the manner in which America is running its public finances rather than the public economy. Now, you could argue that American economy is growing because of these particular deficits. Okay, I'm not too sure about that. I think it may have got a momentum of its own, but the difficult task of either cutting down on expenditure or raising taxes has to start somewhere down the line, which is politically very difficult. Look, Biden's ratings are not all that high. I mean, inflation is something that has bitten a lot of people, and it has affected America. It has affected America. And in that sense, what he has to do is politically possibly not palatable. Last time we talked about American officials going to China.
Hmm.
One of the reasons they travel to China is to tell the Chinese not to do anything stupid with respect to their holding of American bonds. Also, reassurances that, a decoupling of the American and the Chinese economy cannot take place. And therefore, China should not read too much into America's industrial policy, etc., etc., nor should it read more into talk about building up alternative supply chains. Or building up alternative supply chains is not a very fast process, it takes time. So
Hmm.
it's there. Where the other economies are concerned, the Chinese economy we discussed last time has stalled. Okay. It's in a middle income trap or about to enter one. But I believe to a great extent the solution lies in Chinese hands. So the question is the following. If they believe that they can export their way to the rest of the world, beggar the rest of the world and keep on growing rich, the time for that has ended. You have to build up internal purchasing power. Until you start building up internal purchasing power, do away with a policy that sees low wages and low costs as the basis of growth, and stealing technology from others. That's not going to happen. You have to basically do what the Japanese did in the 50s and 60s. Start with your income doubling plans. Transfer incomes to your lower classes, build up domestic demand as a replacement for foreign demand. I'm afraid China will be in serious trouble. Okay, and inflation has not gone away from Europe. And to add to that, to this are the two more serious problems. The war in Ukraine, in a sense, has not yet ended. It doesn't seem like ending anytime soon. So there is a problem. There was an existing problem with Germany when it came to its power supplies, oil and gas. There's uncertainty over oil and gas flowing from Russia. And now, with the latest, let us say, movements in Africa, the power surplus France, which was supplying power to Germany, is now seriously under question. Look, we should read a Russian hand into this, no doubt about it. But I would imagine that it's not as if the coup leaders in the African states, after coming to power, said we are going to discontinue uranium supplies to France. It was when France decided to sanction Burkina Faso leaders because they had basically overthrown the leaders in a coup. This particular step was taken. But look, this is France's backyard. I don't think France is going to take this lying down. I don't think France has run out of cards. And there are certain things France can do. But I believe France, unlike the Americans, negotiate. They will negotiate with the Russians, with the Burkina Faso authorities, etc., etc., and they will try to work their way out through this. And by the way, look, Burkina Faso is not the only source of uranium in the world. There are alternative sources of uranium. Uranium production, in a sense, has to be stepped up. There is Canada there, there's Australia there. It can be mitigated. It can be mitigated. Of course, it takes time. This is not going to happen immediately. So what has happened is the following. The global economic scenario, which is important for India, because if the global economy starts to stall, our exports to the rest of the world starts to stall. Okay, that I think is a serious portent that we have to look into. Now, I think somewhere down the line, India will have to take a stronger diplomatic role. Happymon Jacob in his article talked about India basically stepping up its role in a country like Ukraine. I think somewhere down the line we have to take that particular risk and start talking to the West and as well as the Russians. I think the time may be right. I think the chances or the hopes of an Ukrainian uprising or a advance pushing the Russians back into Russia, in a sense, are fading. The Europeans, I think, have had enough. I think now, the ones who are cheering on are the ones who have least to be affected by this war. Brits and the Americans. The ones who are really being affected is continental Europe. I think the time is now ripe for India to quietly start talking to both parties. If not the Ukrainians, certainly the Germans and the Russians, to find out a face-saving way out of this particular morass. And I think we all have to start discussions on Ukraine. What will be the future of Ukraine be? One good way to, I think, would be that. If that happens, then I think the troubles in Africa will have less salience. But let us face it, the Russians are now in a sweet spot where Africa is concerned. They not just control energy supplies to Europe, they now have a hand in that spigot when it comes to uranium supplies to France as well.
So it's basically the energy war that is playing out, sir. And one very interesting thing that you've brought out, and I think you've hinted towards it, but you didn't kind of phrase it out. I would call this war, a Ukrainian war, more of a commodity war and an economic war rather than the military war, because military war is confined
Okay,
to that location.
okay, Adi, the commodity war and the energy war came later.
Hmm.
The Ukraine conflict, in a sense, is not about energy. It has become one of energy.
Hmm.
Why? You see, with respect to Ukraine, the West, particularly the United States and the others, broke a slew of promises which they made to Russia after the end of the Cold War.
Correct.
I think the Orange Revolution, whereby a democratically elected president was actually overthrown by a mob, was the last stroke. Now, and what Russia did after that was only natural, although it also meant that having done that, Russia could not go back. Once you take over Crimea, it's difficult to go back. And right now, having entered this particular war, I think the Russians bit off more than they could chew. But then the Europeans also and the West also has not been honest about this. They thought Ukraine is another Vietnam where the Russians are concerned.
Mhm.
They forgot that the Russians under Putin have basically been expanding Russia's influence in other parts. Okay, uh, Africa is one part. Okay, now it became an energy war because the West thought that by not buying Russian energy, we would basically strangle the Russians.
Hmm.
Okay, it didn't happen. I mean, for one, India is buying Russian energy and refining it and selling it to the rest of the world. Okay, and even now we buy less energy than many Western countries. So forget it. These are solutions given by those countries which are not affected by these particular steps. Okay, so it became an energy war, it became a wheat war because Ukraine, in a sense, had to be hammered into submission. So obviously, the Russians say we will not let them export grain. So it's becoming an energy war because both sides, in a sense, want to strangulate the others. And how do you strangle the others? By cutting off that particular export item, which you think will bring the other to his knees. The
Hmm.
Russians, in a sense, want to do it because they want some sort of a global hurt so that the other countries basically can tell the Yanks, yeah, come on, let us have peace. Broker a peace solution out here. So it's become an energy war. It's become a conflict with this, with respect to commodities and energy. But the source of the conflict is not energy or commodities.
I
It
absolutely.
is
Hmm.
I think, Western bad faith with respect to Ukraine, which has continued over a long period of time.
I mean, that's interesting that you say that, because I think the first step towards this economic and commodity war was taken by the West itself when they froze the Russian assets and this and that. So it's
Yeah, yeah.
you attack only when you're willing to take the same attack back. I don't think that
Hmm.
was thought of. So since we are talking about Europe, so let's begin the discussion from Europe itself. France went through heck in a handbasket. There are issues within the German government as well. uh, a lot of people now are actually counting days for Scholz to be there. How long will Scholz be there? And I was talking to somebody in Germany some time ago. Uh, a person who watches my Ukraine this thing. So he connected with me, and I asked him. He says, the hard right is picking up speed in Germany. Now, when something like that happens, it's going to upturn the entire sort of a, if I may say, the globalist structure which is set up within Europe and America, because one wicket down and it will create, and especially the German wicket is going to be big. What he also told me is about Macron. He said he's also standing on very thin ice. Uh, the French are not going to accept him for a long time. So, how do you see these two countries, which are controlling the European economy, going forward, and what are the steps that they're going to take to kind of mitigate themselves?
Look, I feel sorry for the German Chancellor. I'll tell you why. He has a Russia problem when, to a great extent, it was his party, Schroeder, who opened the country to the Russians. You know this. And
Yeah.
Schroeder also is an employee. He's basically is a consultant to, I think, Gazprom, or for that matter, some Russian oil giant. Okay.
Hmm.
So the natural inclination for the Social Democrats, at least a section of it, would be to normalize relationships with Russia. He's also facing a backlash from the far right for a problem that is not his creation. You see, remember, during the Syrian refugee crisis, it was Merkel who allowed a whole lot of refugees to come in from Afghanistan, from Syria, etc., etc. And apocryphal stories and other stories basically say that much of the lawlessness that has arisen in Germany because of immigrants is basically because of this lot of immigrants which came in, who were brought in by Merkel's policies.
Yeah.
So now, see what a paradox. Generally, you expect the left to be far more liberal with refugees, but it was Merkel. So he is dealing with issues bequeathed to him both by his party as well as Merkel's party. What does he do now? Does he crack down on refugees, etc., etc., which does not go well with his party? Does he crack down? What does he do about Russia? What does he do about Russia? Because at the end of the day, he has to look to his allies as well. And when it comes to ideology, the Greens may have a particular economic ideology, but when it comes to foreign policy, they have this holier than thou approach, which makes any coalition dependent on the Greens, particularly weak when it comes to international maneuvering. So he has a problem. I'm not too sure which leader in Russia will be able to solve that particular problem, but he has a problem. Okay. And given the kind of sclerosis that he is in, it's not surprising that the far right basically would start making gains. Okay. Now, we've seen this before in other countries as well. Let us see how long it will go. But somewhere down the line, I think at least the major parties will have to sit together quietly and do something about the immigration problem. Because that, in a sense, has to be tackled. You have inflation, you have stalling growth, and now you have lawlessness as well in German cities. So somewhere down the line, somebody has to basically tackle these particular issues. Let us look at France. Macron is also dealing with an issue which is a bequest, which also is part creation, because he was also one of the guys very gung-ho when it came to Syria. Topple Assad, etc., etc. And there are consequences to that. So Macron is having a problem because he's trying to reform the French public finances, trying to make France more competitive, which means that you have to do something about retirement benefits and a whole slew of social benefits that France gives to its citizens. And the French workers, in a sense, are not taking it lying down. So he has not retreated, but the fact is, neither, in a sense, has the protesters. Now, somewhere down the line, Macron will have to will have to take certain risks. Now, those are the kind of risks I would have expected a French president from the right to have taken. Whether Macron, with his centrist leanings, is able to take that position or not is another question altogether. But the fact is, I don't see who will be a challenger to Macron. People talk a lot about Marine Le Pen, but whether she will be able, but what we see is when it comes to the final hustings, somewhere down the line, the French voter, in a sense, still shy away from giving that particular mandate to the far right.
Yeah.
Yet, we don't know whether this will change or not. But the fact remains that the kind of rioting that you have been seeing in France, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you would have had the usual suspects in France. papering it over and saying, no, it's the state's fault, etc., etc. And some in parliament indeed have said that.
Yeah.
How reflective are those statements of France's population today? I'm not too sure. So let us see. I think, by the way, the French do not hesitate from taking ruthless steps
Yeah.
to stop the recurrence of this particular problems. By the way, this problem has happened. Rest assured, the French security forces, their police, internal security, will start identifying the characters who actually initiated this, and bad things will happen to them. Make no mistake, make no mistake. This lecture about the rule of law, constitutional processes is for the Republic of India. They will do whatever needs to be done to tackle this particular problem.
Yeah. I mean, even the media, if you read Le Monde, and if you read, I have been following this thing because of Indian French relations. If you read the Le Monde, and if you read all the France 24 for that matter, they're so left wing, not even funny. So I wonder who's going to break the ice in that country. So what does that do to the European economy? Because they are more predominantly focused on towards, oh, let's give this to Ukraine, oh, this, that, oh, this, oh, that. The concept of the game right now is, oh, we need to produce 1,000,000 shells. Fair enough. You want to produce 1,000,000 shells. Your monthly production right now is 4,000. How do you plan to scale it up? Where will you get the metal from? Where will you get the gunpowder from? Where will you get all this stuff from? So I don't see them focusing towards their economy, because when you read European newspapers, they don't talk about it at all.
Look, there is a production problem when it comes to armaments, especially shell production, but that's just a minor problem. Yeah. I have absolutely no doubt that these economies, if they make up their minds, you can produce sufficient number of shells basically for Ukraine. Look, there is also policy paralysis in these particular countries. Okay. If you look at the ease of doing business in continental Europe, you'd be surprised. Countries like Sweden are probably better if somebody wants to set up a new business than the other European countries. Look, wow. Let us face it. When it comes to dynamism of the European economies, if you look at the top 10 German companies today, compare them to 30 years ago, they will be the same. This will not be true for the United States. It is quite likely that several of the entries did not exist 30 years ago. So America, with all its problems, in a sense, has the dynamism that new companies come up, they adopt technologies, and once they get the market, they expand very, very fast. Labor laws in Europe, business laws in Europe militate against this particular concept. That doesn't happen. So the renewal of the French economy or the renewal of the German economy, in a sense, does not take place. Okay, I mean, what is the latest German product? What is the latest French product? What is the latest European product? Now, the Philips will be able to tell you, look, we came out with a compact disc. Okay. Apart from that, what? Apart from that, nothing.
Nothing.
If you look at IT products, Finland is there. You have the Scandinavian countries from time to time coming out with new products, etc., etc. But if you look at continental Europe, there is a lot to be desired when it comes to ease of doing business and all that. Okay, so these economies, in a sense, have not been able to revive themselves. In contrast, you go to the United States, you will have French startup entrepreneurs operating in the United States, German startup entrepreneurs operating in the United States, Chinese, Indians, etc., setting up businesses. So there is a dynamism in the American economy which is not there where France is concerned.
Would you term
or Germany is there is a concern?
Yeah, because Germany, I mean, is getting deindustrialized, and sadly, they're letting it happen.
Look, Germany's deindustrialization, I'm telling you, let's not overhype this.
Okay.
As a proportion of its economy that is dependent on manufacturing, Germany is still very, very high.
Hmm.
The latest figures that you see, in a sense, possibly has to do with the energy shortages, where production may have had to be cut down. I
Yeah.
don't think it's a long-term trend. No, it's a long-term trend in a sense that as Germany gets richer, you move to services. Also, the fact is the Chinese and the other countries will slowly but surely chip away at those areas which you had a commanding presence because they can produce it cheaper and at a cheaper level. And since technology will be stolen from you anyway, that will happen. The Germans are in bed with the Chinese for a long period of time, possibly hoping against hope that their technology will not be stolen. But the technology will be stolen. It will be stolen. And after some time, the Chinese will come after your market as well. So in the long run, it's going to happen. But I believe the recent contraction, stalling of the manufacturing sector in Germany probably has more to do with stoppage of production due to energy shortages than anything else.
So it's temporary,
I
which is
believe
very.
it's temporary, but then, if temporary becomes too long, then it will not be temporary any longer.
Let's move across the big pond, sir. The Americans, again, they were in that debt crisis, the debt ceiling thing, which comes up every 2 3
Yeah,
years. They increase it,
yeah,
print more money, and this and that.
yeah.
But the narrative which I see, the whole de-dollarization narrative, although I buy it into, I personally am not a economist or anything like that, but I buy into it to a certain extent. I don't believe that the dollar will completely lose its, game. But the funny thing is that the Americans have started talking about it today. George Soros said this. And that is interesting to me when a guy like that says, yeah, it is important that we bring down the dollar reserves and this and that. How do you see that? I mean, what kind of a
Okay.
projection do you see for the Americans?
The dollar does two things from America. One is good and one is bad.
So,
What is the good thing? The good thing is the following: that if I want to buy stuff from the rest of the world, or if I basically run out of money, what do?
hmm,
I print more money and basically use it. And
right.
because the rest of the world is willing to accept this particular paper, I basically print myself out of financial trouble whenever I am in trouble. That's a good thing. You see, people accept the paper that I'm offering as the real thing, and they accept it and they give me goods in exchange for that particular paper or that promise.
Hmm,
What is the bad thing? The bad thing is the following: for other countries, if I ran a persistent trade deficit, over time, the value of my currency, in a sense, would decline, and as a vis-a-vis the other currency, and my exports will become more and more competitive. That's one thing. And
correct.
also, because of trade deficit and because of the decline of my currency's value, there would be also some inflation imported in, because I would have to pay more for imports. So as a result of it, there would be some inflation, and the government of the day would be forced to do certain things to live within its means. That has not happened for the United States. Although the value of the dollar vis-a-vis the yen, etc., has fallen, okay, it has not fallen to that level where exports are equal to imports. So the having the dollar as the reserve currency of the world has contributed, in my opinion, to the deindustrialization of the United States. What amazes me is, in spite of this, the United States is still able to reinvent itself from time to time. In the 80s, we were told it's all over for the United States.
Yeah.
Japan is the new kid on the block. Come the 90s, Japan goes into a recession, and the Americans reinvent themselves in the 90s throughout. Okay. And the public finances also, they start having operating trades, government surpluses. Of course, it takes the fiscal genius of George Bush Jr. to overturn that completely and run America into a mess.
Yeah.
And the years of Obama is not able, in a sense, to cure that. Donald Trump again goes into this, and today you have them asking for another relief from the debt ceiling. Okay, so the fact American industry and the Americans are able to come up with new industries in spite of the politicians is something that is surprising. But the fact is, de-dollarization is not going to happen anytime soon. Why? You have a country like China, which has a structural problem in the sense that it has to export to grow.
Correct.
Export to who? A country willing to take that particular export. And the only thing that they can pay you with it are not goods but dollars. So accepting American dollars for a lot of exporters, export-led countries, is also a, I won't say obligation on their part. It is something that they have to live with. It is a condition. Otherwise, tell China to balance its trade, ensure that its exports is equal to imports, or import something from the United States so that the deficit is bridged. That they won't do, because to import, domestic demand needs to rise. But you have followed a policy whereby growing income inequality, great income inequality in China has ensured that domestic consumption, in a sense, has not risen. So under those circumstances, the only way you can maintain full capacity or try to go towards full capacity is to export your way out of trouble. So that is a constraint now that you have to live with. You export and you get dollars in return.
Now, how do you see that?
De-dollarization will not take place.
Yeah, I mean, it'll probably reduce the dominance, but I don't think the dollar will completely vanish from the market.
It'll take some time. It'll take some time.
Absolutely. So, but how do you look at, I mean, now, since we're talking about US, China, I want to just stick to that before we come around the world. US, China is an interesting game because you see the Chinese now, we spoke about it last time, they devalued their currency a little bit to kind of make themselves a little more competitive in the open market. Is it that they've devalued, when we look at, I actually studied further after that. I want to ask you this question again with a new paradigm. Is it that they've devalued, or just the capital controls that they've put into place are so strong that they're not able to kind of balance it out? That's point one. And the second question would be that the Chinese kind of keep on pushing across that let's deal with yuan. But considering the factor, let's say, this part of the world starts dealing with yuan, it'll be so much easier for these Chinese billionaires to just get out of China, taking away their money. So would the Chinese...
That can't happen. That can't happen. I'll tell you why. To have yuan, I need yuan. Yeah. I will get yuan if China buys my goods, allows me to export to China. In that case, Chinese can say, take yuan. Okay. But China, in a sense, has a massive surplus with the rest of the world. So there is a shortage of yuan where the rest of the world is concerned. Yuan would have become plentiful in supply with the rest of the world if only the Chinese had imported more from the rest of the world. So when you import from the rest of the world, you offer to pay with yuan, I will have yuan. But if you don't allow me to export to you because you basically deliberately have a policy of not allowing me to export to you, where will I get the yuan from? Why do people use the dollar? Because they have dollars. Why do they have dollars? Because the United States, in that sense, is the most open economy. It's easy to crack. People will talk about measures which will say Singapore is the most economy, etc., etc. But given its size, it's the easiest market to crack if you want to export. You export, you get dollars. Can you do that in China? You can't. No. And to be an accepted currency of the world, that currency, in a sense, has to be available to the rest of the world. and it is not available to the rest of the world because the Chinese ensure that you are not able to export to them. Now, is the decline because of capital controls? I believe what China has seen over the years, that some supply chains, in a sense, have been shifting to Vietnam, have been shifting to Bangladesh.
Hmm.
When will this trickle turn into a flood? You never know. And therefore, I think this could be one of the reasons where they have readjusted the value of the yuan. But it's not going to work. You see, if if a supplier or a sourcer of electronic products has shifted substantially to Vietnam, these small changes in exchange rates really do not matter. That they work that into their margins. I think Vietnam is there to stay as an alternative supply chain where a range of electronic items are concerned. So is Bangladesh. Now it is up to India, how India basically is able to position itself and offer itself also as a reliable source of goods to the West.
Interesting, very interesting, sir. Can we now just swing across the, we went, I'll swing back into Africa. We'll just discuss Africa for a little bit.
Sure.
The Africans seem to have realized one thing, which I think we as India realized about 2, 3, 4 years ago, that we are being used. One of the biggest things that is coming out, and that's a common perception which is coming out. You've got countries like Nigeria and all that, which are still heavily influenced by the West, who are opposing what's happening in Burkina Faso and in Niger and all that. Having said that, I personally don't approve of military takeovers, but one can understand where they're coming from. Looking at the figures that have actually come out into the open domain, one can really understand where they're coming from. How do you see this particular economic bloc strengthening up going forward? Because one of the biggest things that we are seeing is the Africans now gaining a certain voice. And the dominance, the economic dominance that the Africans were under is kind of loosening up a little bit. So how do you see Africa going forward, sir? It's going to be ripe for the taking for anybody who treats them well.
Tragedy is I don't see Africa going forward. Look, Africa always had resources. And in that sense, for a country like Nigeria, the 70s were the best decade. Very high oil prices. What did the Nigerians do with that particular money? What did the various journals do with that particular money? And they looted it all, and Nigeria just went underground. Okay.
Yeah.
Things have not changed. There is a resources boom because the Chinese have been growing so fast. They require resources, natural resources, in a sense, to grow. But compared today, the Africans are in greater debt, but their ability and willingness of these regimes to convert these newfound riches into development for themselves, in a sense, is something that I have not seen. You have campaigns, from Gabon, invest in Gabon, etc., etc., etc. But I don't see anything on the ground to suggest that the milieu, in a sense, has changed. What has changed is certain African countries, in a sense, have looked askance at the developments in Niger and Burkina Faso, and they said, look, we could come in. And the moment they said we could come in, the other countries have said, okay, we could come in too. But you see, a country like Nigeria, with its strength, if it moves into Niger or Burkina Faso, I think Mali's capability to face the Nigerians down is somewhat limited. But if the Nigerians take on the Wagner group, then of course it's another matter altogether. We won't know who will prevail in that. I would imagine, given the preponderance of the Nigerian military, the Nigerians would probably prevail, but I don't think the Nigerians want to find that out. So far, what we've been hearing, these voices of threats of war from the African countries are just that, threats. In a sense, it is part threats, a signal to the people who've just taken over, behave yourself, in a sense, don't disturb the supply chain of energy, minerals, etc., etc. to the West. And another saying here, another set of voices saying, don't come in. There's a consequence to be paid. Let us wait. Let us wait. You see, if the Africans, these two countries, don't sell uranium to France, who will they sell it to? Okay. You could argue they could sell it to China, etc., etc. I'm not too sure. It's not that easy. So let us watch this particular space. I have no doubt that the French are already talking to the African leaders, but I believe the Russians are also listening in. So whatever happens, in a sense, has to be sustainable where that particular country is concerned. It also has to be acceptable to the Russians. Okay. So in this scheme of things, I do not see the Africans economically transforming themselves given the boom. So far what we've seen is the Africans lending themselves to be trapped under Chinese projects, debt trapped into Chinese projects. I'm not too sure that the Chinese have an upper hand, because when the Africans will say that this is an odious debt, I have no intention of paying back, and go back to the West, you never know.
Angola
so far, look, early days.
Fair enough.
Early days.
I mean, it's a very developing situation. You've got
India. It's a developing situation.
You've got India in there in the East Coast trying to mine out oil and gas. You've got the Russians in there. You've got the Chinese in there. You've got obviously the West that is dominant in there at the moment. So let's see how it actually plays out. Let's come to Asia, sir, where I think there is a bit of a bright star. You've got Saudi, which is, stable. You've got the Gulf, Emiratis, which are, of course, they are stable. The Saudis are making money. India is making money. You've got a sinking hole in Pakistan, of course. Afghanistan is not on the map as far as all this is concerned. You've got a Sri Lanka, which is stabling. You've got a Nepal, which is now degrading. They're becoming more and more arrogant because they're realizing that this is becoming a bit dicey. You've got the Bangladeshis, which are, again, I won't say they're bad, but they're not good either. You got Myanmar, which is in a sinkhole. And the Southeast Asia, which is, I won't say that they are growing fast and developing and all that. I would say they're stable and stagnant. How do you see the Asian economy opening up or closing down or going which direction, sir?
Look, the Saudis have realized that they cannot go on the manner in which they used to go on. And if you look at what Mohammed bin Salman has done, has been in this particular area. Okay, he is opening up. The Emiratis were always dynamic when it came to trade and investment. Oman has always been an island of stability. It has basically been independent. It has kept good relations with Iran, and it has kept good relations with the West. The Qataris, in a sense, are a problem. But I believe the Saudis did not manage the Qataris well. They could have managed them well, so as not to push them in the Turkish camp. Okay, although the Turkish camp is not somewhere where the Qataris would like to be. So hopefully, I think Qatar, in a sense, will be managed, and and that would be good for India, because if you look at Qatar, relations between India and Qatar actually are very good. But there are irritants like Al Jazeera, which basically, broadcasts, and its coverage of India, in a sense, is not good. And a lot of people in the Arab world listen to Al Jazeera, and their views about India to a great extent are also formed by what Al Jazeera reports. But the fact is, we have been able to keep our relations with Qatar well, but we can't manage Al Jazeera. Management of Al Jazeera, in a sense, has to be done by the other Arab neighbors, and that needs to be managed. That we will do. With respect to Iran, I think this is something that the Americans have failed very badly. Look, one wrong policy that Donald Trump had was his Iran policy. What good it did to United States, I don't know. But Iran was hurt, India was hurt, and by trying to cut off a
Mm.
major oil producer from the world of oil, you basically pushed up the price of oil.
Yeah.
So, and subsequently, Biden, after coming back, did not bring Iran back from the cold. That's the failure. Now, what does it do? It starts to buy from Venezuela, the same Venezuela you kept on bad mouthing for very good reasons for a long period of time.
30 years. Mm.
30 years. So the question is, I would have bought in the Iranians back in from the cold and brought their oil. And had I done that, possibly instead of weakening the moderates and strengthening the radicals, Raisi, I would have still had some kind of a moderate still ruling Iran. But then that's a bit hoping bit much, because ultimately who wins in Iran is a dependence on the Rehbar and the Iranian deep state. But nonetheless, I would rather have Iran within the world system
Then out
rather
of it.
than out of it. Okay. And then having a cooperative Iran also opens up Central Asia to India. So if I have a good road from Shah Bahar all the way to Central Asia, then that particular market also opens up. And that market, in a sense, remains cut away from us because, for obvious reasons, we have not been, our route to Central Asia goes through Afghanistan. And although I think we are managing our relations with the Afghans pretty well, the route to Central Asia, in a sense, gets cut off. Pakistan is sinking into a black hole. Let them be there. Let them keep on sinking further. Okay. When it comes to Bangladesh, look, Bangladesh has its problems. But the present Bangladesh regime, in a sense, is not inimical to us. Yeah. Okay? It cooperates. We have signed logistics agreement with them. And, if trade and transit is free to Bangladesh, then accessing the Northeast for India becomes easy. The Northeast can use Bangladesh's ports to go here and there and everywhere.
That road
what the Americans, in a sense, what the Americans are trying, in a sense, is a regime change in Bangladesh. And the party that comes in, the Bangladeshi National Party, will not be one that will be as friendly to you as the current regime, in a sense, has been. Okay, so that's a problem. Are there problems in Bangladesh? There are. But those, in a sense, are manageable problems. If you have a stable regime in Bangladesh, not inimical to you, then there are ways and means, statecraft, other agencies, money, etc. You can do certain things within Bangladesh to ensure that the properties and the rights of the Hindus there are protected. With an unfriendly regime, you can't do so. When it comes to Nepal, I think Nepal is also tiring itself of the Chinese embrace. There is only so much China can do in Nepal. But that requires Nepal to spruce up its own governance. But the point in Nepal, as Ambassador M.K. Rasgotra would say, is no matter which government comes to power in Nepal, every 10-15 years, you will have a problem with Nepal. It will be some vague problem. As the Brits would say about the Irish, it's potatoes one day and the Pope the next. There will be some irritant which will basically upset the entire apple cart. We have to live with that. And we have to hope that the governance in Nepal becomes better. But the fact remains, we have an open border with Nepal. The Nepali citizens who, come to us, they know, because this is one country which will receive them in open arms, no questions asked. The Chinese won't do that. Even those who are favorable to the Chinese know that if you criticize China, the Chinese will not be amused. They will not be amused. You can abuse India and you can find out that India, in a sense, will do nothing. But with Nepal also, we've made certain things very, very clear. We've drawn our lines. We've told this to every government that there are certain lines you cross, there'll be a consequence. So you have to encourage the Nepal government to behave better. If they do that, if you basically send that particular signal, for every foolish action, there will be a deliberate action on our part, then I think you will encourage better behavior where Nepal is concerned. But you have to keep yourself open to Nepal, open to Nepalese goods, etc., etc. Because remember, if the Chinese come into Nepal very easily, there is always potential of you using Nepal to get into Chinese territory, particularly Tibet, also very, very easily. You can do it through Nepali nationals. You can do it through Tibetan nationals who are coming into Nepal. So let Nepal remains porous. Porosity by its very nature is not one way, it's two way. So live with Nepal, use Nepal's porosity to do what you need to do in China, in Tibet, whatever.
Yeah, Nepal is quite open, sir. I mean, the issue in Nepal is not Nepal itself; is the Communist Party of Nepal, which is which is
Right.
a which is a irritant, I think.
But by the way,
Hmm,
even when there was no democracy in Nepal and when the Shahs ran Nepal, you would have problems from time to time.
it was the same. I
Problems
was
which would have had no basis. You would have these particular problems from time to
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
You have to
I
live
was
with
just
that. These are
right.
Nepali idiosyncrasies you have to live with.
Yeah, Nepalese have been like that. I think there is a innate. I guess when you're positioned in that sort of a place geographically, hemmed
Possibly,
in.
possibly,
I guess
possibly,
that's going to be a very natural sort of a response for any country, sir. So,
possibly, possibly.
last two questions. Of course, the last one is going to be on India, but I wanted to
Right?
take us to the extreme east. We've discussed China at length, so I request the viewers to actually look at there, and Chinese references come into many parts of this discussion. When you look at Japan, South Korea, that entire region, what we see is an increase in military expenditure, which
Right?
probably needs to be done with regards to North Korea and the whole lot which is taking place. Of course, a lot of people don't realize everybody blames China for North Korea, and this is one place where I'll keep the Chinese away. It's actually the Russians that control quite a bit in North Korea. It's not the Chinese. As far as Kim Jong Un is concerned, the strings lie in Putin's back pocket. Uh, how do you see that entire game playing out? Because the North Sea, to me, the Arctic and the North Sea is going to be the next battleground as the ice melts. The trade routes
Hmm.
will open up there, and you see the Chinese and the Russians moving their activities in the north. One reason could be that the South China Sea in the Indo-Pacific has become too populated. There's not much maneuver space left for the Chinese. They're trying to move it to the North Sea. So how do you see that entire thing opening out? Because I think Japan is going to be a major player as far as the Indo-Arc or the Pacific Arctic sort of a game is concerned, sir. How do you see that opening out in the next
Look,
few years?
I think the talk of Arctic passages per se is still immature,
Yeah, it is.
premature. I would say premature. Sorry, not
Hmm.
immature, premature.
Hmm.
The problem, in a sense, is China's increasing assertiveness in the South China Sea. Now, you may
Correct.
say it's too populated, but the Chinese, in a sense, are claiming rights over South China Sea, which no other country is willing to give. So, Philippines was trying to come close to China. In a sense, they also have been repelled by Chinese behavior. The South Koreans also know that sooner or later, many of the products in which they have specialization in and advantage in are also, in a sense, will be poached upon by the Chinese.
Hmm.
Okay. So there is this particular thing, but they also need to be on the good side of China because North Korea, in a sense, has to be managed. So Korean maneuverability to a great extent is limited, not so much Japanese maneuverability. Over the years, there's been some sort of a hardening in Japan. You
Yeah.
see, Japan, in a sense, has been, I would say, the victim of its own economic policies. Japan, too, has not been able to come up with any new product except LED, which is a purely Japanese invention. But the Japanese products through which they got rich, in a sense, were all invented in the United States. The Japanese took them over, improved them, manufactured them at a very large scale and at lower prices. That, in a sense, is exhausted. That is what the Chinese do now. So
Hmm.
the Japanese need partners both where economics is concerned and both where defense is concerned, strategy is concerned. Now, under Shinzo Abe, and even now, they believe that under Narendra Modi, you have an India who actually is able and willing to deliver. We have not yet seen that translate into investments, by the way. Okay. And for that, the loser has not just been India. It's been, I believe, it has been Japan as well.
Yeah.
For example, I think using India as a heft, Chinese electronics majors could have easily taken over or protected much of the markets they lost due to the Chinese behemoth. They chose not to do so. You see, shifting of production from China has occurred. Sorry, from Japan has occurred. Where have they gone to? They have gone to Southeast Asia.
Vietnam.
Why haven't they come to India? Partly it is India's fault. India does not have an ecosystem to support that. But now, when you have a prime minister which says make in India, have a host of schemes like the PLI, surely this is the correct time for a host of Chinese electronics companies to seriously look at India as a production site and to challenge the Chinese presence. The Japanese control market shelf, market space still, at least in Japan. They used to control it for a long period of time in the United States as well. Given Chinese quality and technology and competitive costs with respect to China, they can easily recoup that once more. Why aren't they doing it? This is a puzzle that both Japan and India, in a sense, have to ask. But when it comes to strategic issues, it is also clear that India, in a sense, has shown itself willing and able to stand up to China. Now, it doesn't mean that India will allow itself to be used as a gendarme against China. If China behaves itself, India is okay with that. Where the West was concerned, they were okay with China playing the bully vis-a-vis India as long as Western interests were not hurt.
There was no geopolitical cost to China at that time. Yes, sir.
No political cost to China at that time. It is only when Chinese became aggressive everywhere, it is then that many in the West realized, no, look, this is, we've created a Frankenstein of sorts. So did Japan. So did Japan. I remember when India had the nuclear blasts in 1998, the most vociferous criticism and action came from Japan. Understandably so. But today, Japan understands why we did what we did. Because it looks at China and because of what China is doing. So in that sense, I think the Quad is important. And the most unreliable member of the Quad, in that sense, has not been India. It's been Australia.
Yeah.
Remember, Kevin Rudd invested a lot in Australia-China relations. Yeah. They now know that, okay, that's not working. India has been a responsible member of the Quad. And I think teeth has to be put into the Quad. One of the ways of putting teeth into the Quad, in a sense, is to cement this reliance with massive investment in India. The Japanese have to make that investment in India, and the Americans have to give us shelf space. So, tie in the Indian economy with the American economy, develop alternative supply chains, don't be entirely dependent on the Chinese. You do that, then you have the alliance, in a sense, has vested interests to stick to one another. And if that vested interest stick, those interests, in a sense, form an interlocking chain where the four partners are tied together, you will be able to tackle China without any problem. You'll be able to tackle China. You'll be able to tackle China. And remember, you talked about the Southeast and the Far East. Taiwan is also a very important player. I mean, if our silicon semiconductor plants, in a sense, are to take off, the Taiwanese can play a very big role. Very big role. Now, the question is, will you allow them to play that particular role?
Yeah, Foxconn seems to be jumping into the fraser, and
Right, right,
with the
right.
prime minister sitting in audience, I think that's a clear,
Yes,
quite a clear
right.
signal, sir.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
one has to see the politics in Taiwan also, which is a bit weird right now because if the KMT does come to power, you've got a big
Yeah.
challenge in your hand.
No, even if the KMT comes to power, look, the KMT, see, the current president would like to declare independence. There is no appetite in the rest of the world to support that.
Support it.
Okay, the KMT will not want to declare independence. But if anybody thinks that a union of Taiwan and China is at hand, no, they will still want the reassurance and the protective umbrella of the United States to ensure that China, in a sense, doesn't take over. The KMT, at the end of the day, is the party that ruled China. Okay, so for them to say, okay, now Taiwan is the future, that's not going to happen. It has always been the KMT stance. Okay, but I doubt whether they will agree to a immediate takeover
No,
of Taiwan by China. That's not going to
no.
happen.
Eventually, whatever. And I smell a rat in this whole thing. I mean, my mind is a little teda probably. I smell a rat that they'll want to come to power, take a lot of discounts from China, and then start their own campaign within the mainland. Because that's what the KMT has been talking about for the past 70 years. They've shut
Okay,
up about
yeah.
it in
No, no,
2010.
the KMT wants reciprocity. Look, one of the ways of looking at this particular problem the KMT could push through is the following: that when it comes to China and Taiwan, these are not foreign states, they are sovereign ones.
Ah,
Okay,
okay.
the Chinese would not agree to it, but the KMT would claim it. And they would say, look, if you want to be part of us, then KMT and other political formations must have the right to operate in China. That is a killer demand. The Chinese Communist Party will not allow that to happen. So the moment you tell the Chinese Communist Party, of course we are one. So let me open up offices in China, let me campaign in China. You think the
Ah,
Chinese Communist Party will allow it to happen? It won't allow it to happen. So the KMT knows how to make certain demands which are unpalatable to the Chinese government and yet appear so fair and normal that it inhibits the Chinese to say, no, we are going to take over Taiwan. The KMT can say, yes, let us have a talk on union. Okay, we will call it the Republic of China, not the People's Republic of China, which will be a multi-party democracy, etc., etc. Once these talks start, you think the Chinese Communist Party will have a stomach for those particular talks? No, it won't.
uh, sir, I think if any Chinese are watching us, they're going to say, "Oh, ye kya ho raha hai?" you know. So, last comment. Of course, we mentioned India quite a
Yeah.
bit. Please, you want to say something?
Look, a lot of Chinese, see, I think 20 years ago, a lot of Chinese would have been amused.
Yeah.
But now, a lot of Chinese, given the manner in which Xi Jinping has centralized all power, and he has not centralized power to increase Chinese government's efficiency, he has shown himself to be notoriously inept. Okay, so was the previous guy, Hu Jintao. He was inept but not dictatorial. His ineptness led to his weakness. This guy has centralized power and then shown himself to be inept. So a lot of Chinese members of the Chinese Communist Party who, in a sense, are alarmed at the manner in which he's taken over all the parties would actually be happy if it is discomfiture. If he's discomfited, if he's shown to be inefficient or weak, they would be happy about it. They would not be able to state it, but they would jump with joy.
That we see that. So that's
Because
something
in
which is coming up.
2005, In
Yeah.
2005, when I went to China, the discussions I would have with the Chinese, including members of the Communist Party, was something else. Now, when I see what's going on in China, it's another matter altogether.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Sir, closing comment about India. Now, at the end of it, whatever said and done, India needs to take advantage of whatever global situation is there. I mean,
Hmm.
there are two things that I kind of started talking about, and I think that should be the part of the grand narrative of India is hedge your bets always. There is just no questions. Never, never, never let anybody, have the running stream in their hands.
Right?
Hedge your bets. The second would be, of course, take what you can from wherever you get it at this moment, because you just can't say कि भाई oh नहीं मैं China से trade नहीं करूंगा, मैं ये नहीं करूंगा, मैं वो नहीं. It should be take what you can from wherever it is required for your own national interest, and that is point number two, national interest. So how do you see these two things? If firstly, if do you agree with me in this particular thing, how do you
Which is, I agree, Adi, and which is precisely what we're doing. You
yeah.
see, people thought Narendra Modi would not go to the BRICS summit in Johannesburg.
That was a
He's
joke.
going. He's
That
going.
was a
Okay.
Reuters joke, sir.
Yeah,
Actually, not
yeah,
even a
he is
joke. It was a
going. Look,
scientific thing.
you will have all kinds of Western reports saying, what if China and India get closer? At a
Yeah,
time when senior American officials are traveling to China.
yeah,
Okay. So this hypocrisy, in a sense, is amazing. We shouldn't bother about this particular hypocrisy. Let us
correct.
call out their hypocrisy. You have to basically keep on talking to everybody. Okay. You have to
Mhm.
keep on talking to everybody, including the Chinese, which is exactly what we are doing. Okay. And by the way, we are doing stuff in Africa also, except ours is not a predatory adventure in Africa. What the Chinese are doing is a predatory venture in Africa.
Correct.
And talking about, not doing trade with China is foolish.
Why shouldn't I?
There are certain things that we don't make that the Chinese make.
Yeah.
They make it at the cheapest rate. So buy it from China. The question is, why don't you strengthen your own economy so that you are able to make this stuff and other stuff in a cost efficient manner and export to the rest of the world so that you balance your trade?
Hmm.
Okay. So cutting off trade links with China in a jiffy, that's not on. That's just not on. That would
That's
be
too quick.
basically foolish. You would be hobbling yourself. You would
Yeah.
basically cut down production in a lot of streams. So that's not, see, nobody takes that seriously, least of all the government.
Amazing, sir. This has been a roundup of roundups, if I may say that, and it's such a
Thank you.
pleasure to talk because I've now realized with this whole geopolitics opening up. Previously, people were talk about politics, war, peace, this, that, yeah, but the economic factor was not really mentioned that much. Or actually, we in India didn't pay that much attention to it because our economy was in the dump. Now that we are also climbing up, Indians are wanting to know, okay, how does the economies actually fare into geopolitics and stuff like that. And if you remember, our first conversation itself was the geopolitics of economies. So,
Yeah.
and that's something which I feel is going to be the way of the future. And it is interesting that the way that you've brought it out, and we've gone all around the world, as a matter of fact, leaving, I think, the two poles, which which are, we did refer to the Arctic, but we left the two poles. But having said that, one last thing that I'd like to mention, sir, is what you've talked about with regards to the West and China is, I think, one of something that we must consider when we are analyzing these two things in cohesion. You can't look at China separately and the West separately, because today, with the globalized sort of an affair, and I'm not talking about globalized affair with the whole nastiness which is associated with it, but the globalized interconnected economic affairs, one will have to take it very, very seriously. Lastly, I think I can't say how much, but I agree huge amounts with you with regards to what Janet Yellen went and told the Chinese: listen, don't do anything stupid because we can harm you as much as you think you can. So the good cop bad cop routine was played by bad cop Janet Yellen and the good cop Kissinger.
Look, I mean, this is how basically diplomacy, in a sense, is conducted.
Yeah, Absolutely. I said that to someone, and he said, "No, no, yeah, you're overstepping." I said, "Fair enough. Okay, let that be." But I stand corrected. I stand absolutely
But
vindicated.
I would imagine a guy like Kissinger also was sent to find out what the Chinese really have in their minds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Good cop,
कि
यार तो कोई बात नहीं. Let's
गुड
talk.
कॉप, हाँ, या
बात कर लेते हैं यार. गुस्सा मत हो भाई.
बात
कोई
कर
बात
लेते हैं.
नहीं. हो गया. चलो ठीक है. आगे देखते हैं what's happening.
वो है,
Sir,
वो
always
है,
a
वो है.
pleasure. Always a pleasure talking to you, sir. You know,
And send me
and
those Chinese comments, please.
I will do that. I will do that. So I'm sure we'll get a lot in this as well. I have few
Sure.
Chinese pets which are now probably after me because my target focus is always China. So I guess they've realized that यार ये बंदे को पकड़ के रखो. But in any case, sir,
चलो,
thank you
good.
so much for joining me and
Thank you.
look forward for our next interaction very soon. Till then, sir, enjoy.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you.